The 8,974th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is letter dated 28th of February 2014 from the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council. S/2014/136. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Germany and Ukraine to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance,
Я также приветствую на сегодняшнем заседании Генерального секретаря Организации Объединенных Наций Антонио Гутерреса. Заседание также примет участие на основании 39-й временных правил Процедуры Совета заместитель Генерального секретаря по политическим вопросам и вопросам миростроительства госпожа Розмари Декарло. Сейчас Совет Безопасности приступит к рассмотрению пункта 2 повестки дня. Я хотел бы приветствовать его превосходительство генерального секретаря Антонио Гутерреса и предоставить ему слово.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, I want to reaffirm what I expressed this morning in the meeting of the General Assembly. But of course, it wouldn't make any sense to bother you reading again the same text that I'm sure you are all aware of. In between, during the day, a number of events took place, and with your permission, Mr. President, I would like to ask Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo to be able to brief you on those events. But simultaneously, the day was full of rumors and indications that an offensive against the Ukraine was imminent. In the recent past, there were several situations with similar indications, similar rumors. And I never believed in them, convinced that nothing serious would happen. I was wrong. And I would like not to be wrong again today. So, if indeed an operation is being prepared, I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people have already died. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Secretary General for his introductory remarks. And I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Earlier today, the so-called authorities of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics requested military assistance from the Russian Federation. Also today, the Ukrainian authorities declared a nationwide state of emergency and announced other related defense and security measures, including the mobilization of reservists. Throughout the day, we've seen disturbing reports of continued heavy shelling across the contact line and civilian and military casualties. There are also reports of the repeated targeting of civilian infrastructure. This evening, different media are carrying reports of an ongoing large-scale military buildup and on military columns moving towards Ukraine. The Russian Federation has also reportedly shut airspace to civilian aircraft near the border with Ukraine. The United Nations cannot verify any of these reports, but if these developments were confirmed, they would greatly aggravate an already dangerous situation. The Ukrainian authorities are also reporting a new large-scale cyber attack targeting several state and financial institutions. Mr. President, President Zelensky earlier this evening called for continued diplomacy. Separately, President Putin also spoke about his continued readiness to engage in dialogue. We encourage such efforts, even at this late hour. UN staff remain on the ground to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Ukraine. We are committed to staying and delivering. All parties must ensure their safety and security. Respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law is also paramount. We cannot predict exactly what will happen in the coming hours and days in Ukraine. What is clear is the unacceptably high cost in human suffering and destruction of an escalation. The people of Ukraine want peace, and I'm certain the people of Russia want peace. We must do everything in our power to ensure that peace prevails. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю госпожу Ди Карло за ее
thank Ms. Di
брифинг.
Carlo for her briefing, and I now give the floor to
Тем членам
those
Совета,
council members who
которые
wish to
хотели бы
make
высказать заявление.
statements.
И первым я
I give
предоставляю
the
слово
floor
представителю Албании.
first to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, this is the fourth time the Council is meeting in Ukraine in a matter of weeks. Every time we meet, reality on the ground confirms, bit by bit, what some of us have been anticipating. Russia has been saying one thing and doing its contrary. We were told troops were retreating when they only have increased. We were told to stop hysteria since troops were in Russian territory. No longer, they are invading a neighbor unprovoked with false pretexts, false narratives, and fabricated news. Every development unfolding in the last 48 hours confirms, to us and to the world, that Russian worries have nothing to do with its security, that its anxieties are not linked to NATO enlargement, that this issue is not a confrontation between Russia and the West. This is a confrontation between Russia and international law, the UN Charter that it deliberately has chosen to ignore, a confrontation between a hegemonistic vision and the rules-based world order. Dear colleagues, it's not about Russia's concern, it's about Russia's appetite. The Ukrainians are facing another aggression just because they dare to exist, because they have chosen to be independent, because they have opted for democracy. Dear colleagues, this is a dark hour not only for Ukraine, but for the entire international community as we witness with trepidation the progression of a pure act of aggression carefully planned and cold-bloodedly being executed. We called and hoped for a back down of the Russian Federation from this senseless, destructive, and self-destructive action. We repeat the same call for Russia to stop, to reflect, to reverse its illegal decisions, to withdraw from this senseless madness, to de-escalate, not to push towards precipice. Several mechanisms are in place and various proposals have been made, including by President Zelensky, whose calls remain unanswered. Diplomacy is like hope. It dies last. But for it to work, it must be seized, not ignored, as the Secretary General just called for here. We call on the fellow members of the Security Council to rally in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia has been warned repeatedly that they will be alone in this foolishness, that they will be responsible for the innocent lives lost, including Russians maybe, and for the destruction caused in the heart of Europe in the 21st century. If they choose to continue to execute their plans, as everything indicates, they will bear not only the consequences of the war, but also the historical blame and shame of invading a neighboring country when its responsibility as a big country, as a permanent member of the Security Council, calls for it to work and help preserve peace and security, not to torpedo it. We reiterate our support to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders and territorial waters. In concluding, I welcome the presence of the Permanent Representative of Ukraine to this meeting. I would like to convey to him, to the Ukrainian government and people, that at this most critical moment in their history, they are not alone, and we stand firm in full solidarity with them for their rights to be free and choose who they want to be. I thank you.
Я благодарю представителя Албании за его заявление и сейчас предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов.
To the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Secretary General. Thank you for your strong stance and your powerful remarks today at the General Assembly and for your remarks tonight. Colleagues, a few moments ago, I spoke to President Biden, who asked me to convey in the strongest possible terms his and our steadfast support for Ukraine and support for the urgent meeting this Council has convened tonight. Furthermore, he asked me to share that the United States and our allies and partners will continue to respond to Russia's actions with unity, with clarity, and with conviction. We are here tonight because we believe, along with Ukraine, that a full-scale further invasion into Ukraine by Russia is imminent. Tonight, we're seeing the Russians close airspace, move troops into Donbas, and move forces into combat-ready positions. This is a perilous moment, and we're here for one reason and one reason only: to ask Russia to stop, return to your borders, send your troops and your tanks and your planes back to their barracks and hangars, and send your diplomats to the negotiating table. Back away from the brink before it is too late. Last week, the United States informed this Council and the world about what we expected to see unfold. We said that Russia would manufacture a pretext for an attack. We have since seen numerous false flag events staged along the lines of contact in Donbas. We said Russia would theatrically convene emergency meetings at the highest levels of the Russian government. We all saw this on Monday with the state televised Security Council meeting held by President Putin, an orchestrated moment in which the Russian government decided to recognize as, and I quote, independent states, unquote, sovereign territory of Ukraine controlled by Russia's proxies since 2014. They literally violated Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity on live television before the world. We said that false proclamations would come declaring Russia would need to defend Russian speakers in Ukraine. We got that and much more from President Putin's speech on Monday and during the speech of the Russian ambassador in the General Assembly today. No one could have predicted just how dangerous, inciting, and far-reaching President Putin's speech would be, with Putin arguing for taking the world back in time to an era of empires and colonies. Finally, we said the attack would come next, that we could expect communications to be jammed, cyber attacks to shut down key Ukrainian institutions. Last week, we attributed to Russia denial of service attacks against Ukrainian banks, and we saw similar activity this morning targeting government sites as well. And in the last few hours, we have received very concerning reports of destructive malware placed on hundreds of computers and executed on at least some. After that, we said would come the bombs and missiles, the soldiers and the tanks. Already soldiers have been deployed to the occupied region of Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight because we believe the rest is imminent. Now, over the past few weeks, Russia has called our predictions hysterical. Russia said we were lying. Russia said we were supplying the world with misinformation. Russia's diplomats even laughed in the face of the human suffering we were sounding the alarm about. But what we said would happen has come to pass for all the world to see. So let us be clear. All parties are not culpable here. There's no middle ground. Calling for both sides to de-escalate only gives Russia a pass. Russia is the aggressor here. Russia's attack on Ukraine is tantamount to an attack on the UN and every member state in the chamber tonight. The Security Council is charged with adjudicating threats to peace and security. Russia is bypassing it entirely and taking matters into its own hands. And that undermines the institution. It undermines everyone who participates in it. The United States, Ukraine, its allies, and partners across Europe, UN officials, every other member of this Security Council, we have all repeatedly implored Russia to engage at the diplomatic table. Those calls were not heard. Instead, tonight, Russia has brought its people, the Ukrainian people, and the world to the brink of a conflict that will produce an untold amount of human suffering. I said it in the General Assembly this morning, and I'll say it again tonight. Everyday Russians should be asking themselves right now, how many Russian lives Putin will sacrifice for his cynical ambitions. Responsible members of this Security Council will stand together, and we will stand with Ukraine. And we will do so despite a reckless, irresponsible, permanent member of the Security Council abusing its powers to attack its neighbor and subvert the UN and our international system. This morning in the General Assembly, we saw dozens of leaders from across the globe stand up to defend the UN Charter and Ukraine against Russia's brazen attacks. We were proud to stand with them. Today, I had the opportunity to meet with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba. And many of you were in the General Assembly Hall this morning when Foreign Minister Kuleba received enthusiastic and overwhelming applause after his remarks. Since he could not be here this evening, I would like to conclude by echoing his words. This morning, he warned us all that, quote, no one will be able to sit out this crisis if President Putin decides that he can move forward with this aggression against Ukraine. Your governments and your people will face painful consequences together with our government and our people, unquote. He is right. History tells us that. And we must confront this threat head on in this council, in the UN, and in our capitals. The people of Ukraine are counting on us. Let's not let them down. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю
I thank
представителя
the
Соединенных
representative of the United
Штатов за ее
States for
заявление.
her
Сейчас
statement, and I now
предоставляю
give
слово
the floor
представителю
to the
Соединенного Королевства.
representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, I thank the Secretary-General and Under-Secretary-General Di Carlo for their remarks. We are here tonight to call on Russia to avert war. For months, Russia has been holding a gun to Ukraine's head. Now, President Putin's finger is on the trigger. A full-scale conflict in a country of 44 million people will bring immense suffering, casualties on both sides, and devastating humanitarian consequences. The members of this Council, the General Assembly, and the Secretary-General have all called this week for respect for the principles of the UN Charter. The world is calling for peace, but Russia is not listening. Mr. President, make no mistake, the UK will not compromise. We will not compromise our commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, our support for peace, prosperity, and the democratic freedom of the people of Ukraine. We will not compromise our commitment to the purpose and principles of the UN Charter. Above all, the founding principle of this United Nations, that we live together in peace with one another as good neighbours. Russia's actions are an assault on the Charter. And we will not compromise our commitment to a search for peace. We're here for the second time this week in the Council. My Prime Minister and Foreign and Defence Secretaries have been unsparing in their diplomatic efforts. But we have also announced a significant further sanction step against Russia with our allies, a package targeted against some of the Russian oligarchs, banks, and politicians supporting President Putin. And we will ratchet up economic consequences should Russia continue its aggression. There is still time for restraint, reason, and de-escalation. But that time is now. Thank you.
Благодарю представителя Соединенного Королевства за ее
The
заявление.
representative
Сейчас
of the United
предоставляю
Kingdom
слово
for
представителю
her
Франции.
statement, and I now give the floor to representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
President,
je remercie le secrétaire
thank the
général pour
Secretary
sa mobilisation et pour son
for his
appel
engagement
que la France
and for his
soutient
call,
pleinement.
which France
À l'heure où
fully
nous parlons,
supports.
la
As we
Russie
speak,
est sur le point
Russia
de
is on
provoquer
the
le
verge
chaos en
of
Ukraine
provoking
et de
chaos in
porter un
Ukraine
coup injustifiable
and
à la paix et
striking
à la
an
sécurité
unjustifiable
au cœur de
blow
l'Europe.
to peace and
Depuis
security
plusieurs
in the
mois,
heart of Europe.
le président de la Fédération
For
de
several
Russie
months, the
a
president of the
patiemment
Russian
préparé
Federation
de quoi
has
mener
patiently
une offensive
prepared
majeure
the
contre
means
l'Ukraine.
for a major offensive
Il a amassé
against
des soldats et
Ukraine.
des armes
He has
à un
massed
niveau sans précédent
soldiers and gathered
depuis la
weapons
fin de la
at
Seconde
an
Guerre mondiale
unprecedented level since
Il a
the
incité
end
à la
of the Second
violence
World War.
par le
He has
mensonge et la
incited
désinformation.
violence through
Il a
lies
nié
and
jusqu'à la
disinformation.
légitimité
He has
même de
denied
l'État
even the
ukrainien.
legitimacy of the
Il a
Ukrainian
porté
state
atteinte à la souveraineté
He has
et à
attacked
l'intégrité
sovereignty
de l'Ukraine
and
par la
the
reconnaissance de
integrity
l'indépendance
of
de
Ukraine
portions
by
du territoire
recognizing the
ukrainien.
independence of portions of Ukrainian
Face à cette
territory.
stratégie de
Faced
menaces
with this
et de
strategy of
déstabilisation,
threats and
l'Ukraine a fait
destabilization,
preuve d'une retenue admirable.
Ukraine has
Elle n'a pas
demonstrated
cédé à la
admirable
violence
restraint.
en dépit
It
des
did not
incitations
resort to
russes.
violence despite
Je
the
veux redire
Russian
notre
provocation.
solidarité avec le
I
peuple
wish to
ukrainien,
reiterate our
comme l'a rappelé le
solidarity
président
with the
Macron
people of Ukraine,
à son homologue ukrainien
as
il y a quelques
President
heures.
Macron reminded his
Face à cette
Ukrainian
stratégie de
counterpart
désordre
a
et
few
de
hours ago.
confrontation, les
Faced
dirigeants
with this
d'Europe et
strategy
des
of
États-Unis
disorder
ont
and
démontré leur
confrontation,
unité
the leaders of
et
Europe and the
redoublé
United
d'efforts
States
pour
showed their
proposer
unity
une issue
and redoubled their
diplomatique.
efforts
Le
to
président Macron,
propose
en lien avec le
a
chancelier
diplomatic
Scholz
outcome.
et de nombreux
President
partenaires,
Macron,
y ont pris toute leur
together
part.
with Chancellor
Ils ont
Scholz
fait part
and
de leur
many partners,
disponibilité
have
à
all
construire
done their part.
avec la Russie
They have
une architecture de
demonstrated
sécurité
their
renouvelée
availability
pour l'Europe.
to build with Russia
La
a
France
renewed
condamne avec
security
force
architecture for
la
Europe.
stratégie de provocation à la guerre du président
France
russe.
strongly condemns the
Nous entendons
strategy of
l'appel du
provocation
peuple
to
ukrainien
war of the Russian
porté
president.
par le président
We hear the
Zelensky dans son
call
adresse à la
of
nation
the
il y a
Ukrainian
quelques
people,
heures.
conveyed by President
Les Ukrainiens
Zelensky in his
veulent la
address to
paix.
the Russian nation
Ils
a
souhaitent une
few
relation
hours
de bon
ago.
voisinage avec la
Ukrainians
Russie,
want peace.
à
They want
l'image
a relationship
des
of
relations
good
familiales et
neighborliness
personnelles
with
qui
Russia,
unissent tant de Russes et d'Ukrainiens.
mirroring the family and
Monsieur le
personal
Président,
relationships which
la communauté
bind
internationale
to so
a
many
de manière unie
Russians
fait
and
entendre sa
Ukrainians.
voix
The
aujourd'hui à
international
l'Assemblée
community,
générale.
Mr.
C'est
President,
celle du respect
has
de la Charte des
made
Nations
its
Unies,
voice heard,
celle du
its
règlement
united voice
pacifique des
today at
conflits,
the General Assembly.
celle de la diplomatie.
It
Elle
is
fait
out of
écho
respect of the
aux
Charter of the
déclarations
United
claires
Nations,
du
the
secrétaire
peaceful
général.
settlement of disputes,
Nous appelons
that of
une nouvelle fois
diplomacy. It
la
echoes the
Fédération de
clear
Russie
declarations of
à
the
suivre
Secretary
cette
General.
voie, à
Once again,
revenir sur sa
we
décision de
call on the
reconnaissance
Russian
des
Federation to
entités
follow this
séparatistes
path,
de l'Est de l'Ukraine
to
et à
draw
rappeler ses
back
soldats.
on its decision
Nous
to
appelons chacun
recognize
des membres de ce
separatist entities
Conseil
of Eastern Ukraine
à
and to
agir en
call its
responsabilité
soldiers back.
et à
We call
soutenir
each of the
de manière
members of this
résolue
council to
toutes
act
les
responsibly
initiatives
and to
visant à
resolutely
prévenir
support
et à mettre un
all
terme
initiatives
aux violations de
to
la Charte
prevent
des
and
Nations
put an
Unies.
end to violations
Si la
of the
Russie
Charter of the United
confirme le choix de la
Nations.
guerre,
If Russia
elle devra en
confirms that
assumer
its
toutes
choice
les
is war,
responsabilités et en
it will
payer
have
le
to
prix.
take all of the
remercie.
responsibility and pay the price. Thank you.
Я благодарю
I
представителя
thank the
Франции за его
representative
заявление.
of France for his
Предоставляю слово
statement. I now give
представителю
the
Ирландии.
floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the Secretary-General and Under-Secretary-General De Carlo for their very sobering remarks at the beginning of our meeting. Mr. President, tonight as we gather at this table, we are staring into the abyss of a major conflict in Europe, a conflict that would have major global implications. Tonight, the core principles of this United Nations, in which we believe, are under attack. In Ireland, we know the importance of the rules-based international order. We know the importance of respecting the voice and integrity of all countries, big or small. Most fundamentally, we know the value of peace. We believe that one state threatening and using lethal force against another to get its way or to expand its territory is no solution. Ireland has a deep understanding, informed by our history, that dialogue and respect resolve disputes. Tonight, this drives our solidarity with Ukraine. It is our collective responsibility, indeed our obligation here at this table, to maintain international peace and security, nothing less. That means we stand up for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of every member state of the United Nations. Let's be clear, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine have not changed. The decision by Russia to recognize as independent entities the non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine does not change those borders one iota. They did not change in 2014, and they have not changed this week. We urge the Russian Federation to reverse this decision immediately. We urge the Russian Federation to refrain from further escalatory unilateral actions which can only serve to further deepen this crisis. Tonight, the path for diplomacy, the path for dialogue that we have called on for so long is perilously narrow. The principles of the UN Charter we hold dear have already been breached. These principles now risk being further violated. This is the time to show courage, the courage and the time now to pull back from the precipice, the time to return to dialogue and to diplomacy. The use of military aggression has no place in our modern world. Have we learned absolutely nothing from our history? These United Nations rose from the ashes of 2 world wars. The senseless destruction of that era was born of a belief that military might makes right. This philosophy, applied with modern weaponry, would unleash devastation and human suffering, affecting millions of innocent people. Tonight, we stand with the people of Ukraine. Tonight, we stand with the UN Charter. We stand with those who, even in this dark hour, still have the courage and hope to bring us back from this precipice. A resort to military conquest for one state to impose its will unilaterally against another, to annex part of its territory, has absolutely no place in the 21st century. There is still a choice to turn from the path of war to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. Mr. President, it is never too late to make the right choice. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking Secretary General for his briefing on the evolving situation in the eastern regions of Ukraine. The Security Council had met 2 days ago and discussed the situation. We had called for urgent de-escalation of tensions and emphasized on sustained and focused diplomacy to address all issues concerning the situation. However, we note with regret that the calls of the international community to give time to the recent initiatives undertaken by parties to diffuse tensions were not heeded too. The situation is in danger of spiraling into a major crisis. We express our deep concern over the developments which, if not handled carefully, may well undermine the peace and security of the region. We call for immediate de-escalation and for refraining from any further action that could contribute to a worsening of the situation. We call on all parties to exert greater efforts to bridge divergent interests. I would like to underline that the legitimate security interests of all parties should be fully taken into account. India has consistently advocated at the United Nations the need for peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law and with agreements entered into by parties concerned. I underline once again that more than 20,000 Indian nationals, including students, are located in different parts of Ukraine, including in its border areas. We are facilitating the return of all Indian nationals, including students, as may be required. We believe that the solution lies in sustained diplomatic dialogue between the concerned parties. In the meantime, we strongly emphasize the vital need for all sides to maintain international peace and security by exercising the utmost restraint. I thank you.
I thank the representative of India for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
سيد الرئيس، أود بداية أن أشكر الأمين العام ووكيلة الأمين العام على مداخلاتهما. اجتماعنا هذا هو الاجتماع الرابع الذي يعقده مجلس الأمن حول أوكرانيا في أقل من شهر، وفي ظل التوترات الأخيرة والمثيرة للقلق أخذت بلادي موقفاً يتمثل في الدعوة إلى خفض التصعيد والعمل على إيجاد حل سلمي للأزمة. وفي هذا الإطار نود أن نشير للجوانب التالية. أولاً، نؤكد على ضرورة اللجوء للحوار وبحسن نية مع تكثيف الجهود الدبلوماسية على كافة الأصعدة لدعم فرص السلام بالارتكاز للقانون الدولي. ونكرر أن اتفاقات مينسك لا تزال تشكل أساساً جيداً للوصول إلى حل سلمي للأزمة، وبما يحافظ على الأمن والاستقرار الإقليميين والدوليين. ثانياً، نشدد على ضرورة الالتزام بمبادئ القانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة، لا سيما من حيث تسوية المنازعات الدولية بالوسائل السلمية، واحترام سيادة واستقلال الدول ووحدة أراضيها وسلامتها الإقليمية. إن الالتزام بهذه المبادئ والامتثال لميثاق الأمم المتحدة يعد ركيزة أساسية للتوصل لأي حل مستدام وسلمي للأزمة القائمة. ثالثاً، نكرر بأن الوضع المتأزم في شرق أوكرانيا قد يفاقم من الوضع الحرج للمدنيين، ناهيكم عن استمرار وجود تحديات تتعلق بإيصال المساعدات الإنسانية لبعض المحتاجين، لا سيما في المناطق القريبة من خط النزاع في شرق أوكرانيا، وذلك قبل حدوث التوترات الحالية. إن أي تصعيد آخر قد يؤدي لتفاقم الوضع الإنساني لعدد أكبر من المدنيين، وعليه نكرر أهمية العمل على خفض التصعيد ووقف إطلاق النار، ونهيب في هذا الشأن بجميع الأطراف بأهمية عدم التعرض للمساعدات الإنسانية والمدنيين في مناطق النزاع بما يتماشى مع التزاماتهما بموجب القانون الدولي. وختاماً، السيد الرئيس، تجدد بلادي تأكيدها على أهمية وقف التصعيد واللجوء للحوار البناء ومواصلة العمل لإيجاد حلول سلمية تتسق مع القانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة.
I thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates, and I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
President, I thank the Secretary General and USG Rosemary DiCarlo for their important statement. We are facing the dire prospect of a major war in Europe. Norway strongly condemns the decision by President Putin to send Russian troops into Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and the latest announcements of special military operation. These decisions are unjustified, unprovoked, and irresponsible. We call on Russia to reverse these decisions and to immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw all its military forces from the territory of Ukraine and in the vicinity of its internationally recognized borders. Our thoughts are with those who have already suffered too much due to this conflict, and with all those who are afraid that tomorrow will be a lot worse. We call upon all parties to strictly respect the relevant provisions of international humanitarian law, which calls on the protection of civilians, including humanitarian personnel and civilian infrastructure, and to facilitate safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access to those in need in Ukraine. Like the Secretary General clearly stated, the decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independent of Donetsk and Luhansk regions are violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and are inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Let me recall the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, which are now under threat. The Charter applies to all nations, including Russia. Today in the General Assembly, member states from all over the world strongly urge the parties to pursue negotiation towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict, with respect for international law and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Norway urges Russia, as a party to the Minsk Agreement and to the conflict, to fulfill its commitments, to abide by international law, and to return to the path of diplomacy. Russia has taken on a clear commitment to seek a peaceful settlement to this conflict and must honor it. We commend Ukraine's posture of restraint in the face of continued provocation and destabilization efforts. President, Let me conclude by again reiterating Norway's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its international recognized borders. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President.
主席先生，
Mr. President,
乌克兰局势
the situation
正
in
处于
Ukraine
关键时
is
刻，
at a critical juncture.
中方对此
China has
高
been
度关注。
paying close attention to the
当前
situation.
形势下
In，the current context,
有关各
all
方
parties
都要
concerned
保持克
should
制，
exercise restraint
避免紧
and
张局
avoid
势
the
进一步
further
升级。
escalation of tensions.
我们相信，
We believe that
和平
the
解决
door
乌
to a
克兰
peaceful
问题的大
solution to the
门
Ukraine
没有完
issue
全
is
关
not
上，
fully shut,
也不应
nor
被
should
关
it
上。
be.
中方多次
China
指
has
出，
pointed out on
乌
many
克兰问
occasions
题有
that
其复杂
there
历
is a
史经
complex
纬，
historical context on
局
the
势
Ukraine
演
issue,
变至今
and that the
是
current
各种因
situation
素
is the
综
result
合
of the
作用的
interplay
结
of
果。
many factors.
中国关于维护国
China's
家主
position
权和
on
领土完
safeguarding
整
the
的立场，
sovereignty and territorial
是一贯的。
integrity of all states has
联
been
合国宪章的
consistent.
宗旨
The
和原
purposes
则
and principles
也
of the
应
UN
当得
Charter
到
should be
共
jointly
同的维护
upheld.
我们希望
We hope
有
that
关
all
当事方
parties
保持
concerned
冷静
will
和
stay
理性，
cool-headed and rational
致力于根据
and
联合
commit
国宪章
themselves
原则，
to enhance
加强
dialogue
对
and
话协商，
consultation
谈判解决有
to
关问
resolve
题，
relevant issues
妥善
properly
处理
through
各方的
negotiations
合理安全关切。
and address each other's legitimate
当前
security concerns
尤其要避免激
in
化
line
矛
with the
盾。
principles of the UN
中
Charter.
方将继续以自己的方
It is
式
especially
劝和促
important
谈，
at the moment to avoid
欢
fueling
迎并
tensions.
鼓励
China will
一
continue
切
to
致
promote
力于
peace
推
talks
动
in its
外
own
交解
ways
决
and
的
welcomes
努
and
力。
encourages all
谢谢你，
efforts
主
aimed
席
at a
先生。
diplomatic solution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Я благодарю
I thank
представителя
the
Китая за
representative
его
of
заявление,
China for his
предоставляя
statement, and
слово
I now give the
представителю
floor to the
Бразилии.
representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Secretary General and the Under-Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo for the information and remarks they have put before the Council tonight. Mr. President, the reports received about the movement of troops into certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine are cause for extreme concern. The threat or use of force against the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence of a UN member state is unacceptable. In the present circumstances, the Security Council must act according to its main purpose as holder of the primary responsibility under the United Nations Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. In the exercise of this responsibility, its actions must be geared towards reduction in tensions, towards assisting parties in their negotiations. This is our primary role. The recourse to arms and confrontation cannot lead to lasting peace. In that regard, we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action that may further increase tensions on the ground. The time is not for belligerent rhetoric, nor for military threats, but to engage truly in a diplomatic process. The means of negotiation have not been exhausted. Immediate de-escalation is of high order. It means, among others, complete and unconditional withdrawal of all military forces as an effective measure for the prevention and removal of threats to peace. Parties must abide by the terms of the Minsk agreements, above all by its call for a comprehensive ceasefire. The monitoring mission of the OSCE can assist if granted unrestrained access in order to verify, identify, and report accordingly any violation of the ceasefire. Furthermore, the parties must allow the rapid, safe, and unhindered access of humanitarian assistance to those in need. The protection of civilians, including humanitarian personnel and persons in vulnerable situations, must be respected unconditionally. we redouble our calls for the parties to work constructively in all relevant instances, such as the Normandy format and the Trilateral Contact Group. Negotiations must be mindful of the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty, independence, unity, and territory.
Would be aided by our listening to the Secretary General and utilizing his good offices to deliver according to their intended design. In the coming days, we hope that we will observe de-escalation in Donbas and that every effort will be made to protect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of Ukraine. We further hope that we will benefit from the visionary leadership that the world needs today in committing to negotiating a lasting European security architecture that lowers perceptions of threat and promotes cooperation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kenya for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Je remercie
sir.
le secrétaire général
I
pour
thank
son
the
adresse
Secretary
ainsi que
General for
le
his
secrétaire général
statement,
adjoint
as well
Madame
as
Di Carlo
Under-Secretary
pour les
General
informations
De
fournies.
Carlo for the information she
Monsieur le Président,
provided.
c'est la 4e fois
Sir,
en
this
3
is the
semaines
fourth time in
que ce
3
Conseil se
weeks that
réunit
this
pour
council is
débattre de la
meeting
situation en
to
Ukraine.
discuss the situation in Ukraine.
Nous nous réunissons cette nuit,
We are
48
meeting this
heures
evening,
après notre séance,
48
notre dernière
hours
séance,
after our
parce que
latest
l'intégrité
meeting on
territoriale
the
et
subject,
la
because the
souveraineté nationale de
territorial
l'Ukraine ont été violées.
integrity and the national
Nous nous réunissons ce soir
sovereignty of Ukraine
parce que
have
d'innombrables vies
been
humaines,
attacked.
des femmes et des enfants
We are
sont
meeting
pris
this
dans les
evening
taux de la
because
violence
men,
meurtrière
women,
et des
and
affrontements
children are
à l'est de
caught
l'Ukraine,
in
engendrant
murderous
un
violence
exode massif
in eastern
qui met en
Ukraine,
péril la dignité et la survie de ces
leading
populations.
to a massive exodus
Nous nous
which
réunissons ce
imperils
soir
their dignity and safety.
Parce qu'une fois de
meet
plus,
this
le
evening
spectre
because
d'une
once
guerre
again,
dont l'ampleur des
the
conséquences est
spectre of
redoutée
a war
plane sur
with
toute une région
with
et
redoubtable
parce que nous redoutons
consequences hangs over
une
an
invasion
entire
imminente de
region,
l'Ukraine.
and because we fear
Au moment
an
où nous
imminent
rejetons les
invasion
atteintes
of
aux
Ukraine,
principes fondamentaux de la Charte des Nations
we
Unies,
see an attack
il est
on the
important que notre élan
fundamental
nous conduise encore
principles
plus loin
of the
vers le
Charter of the
respect de
United Nations,
l'intégralité des
and
dispositions de la Charte des Nations Unies
we must
et
go
que l'attention
further
de la
and
communauté
ensure
internationale
that
soit
all of the
portée
provisions of
avec
the
le même
Charter are
engagement,
respected,
avec la
and
même ardeur
that
dans toutes les situations
the
et toutes les
international
régions du monde
community
où
focus
la
with the same
sécurité et la dignité des
commitment, with
peuples
the
est
same
menacée.
ardor
Monsieur le
on
Président,
the need
la décision
for
de la Russie
preserving
de
peace and
reconnaître la
security.
souveraineté des républiques autoproclamées
The
de Donetsk
decision of
et de
Russia
Lugansk
to
est lourde de
recognize
conséquences pour la
the
souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine.
independence of Donetsk
Elle met à
and
mal la
Luhansk
pertinence et la mise en œuvre des accords de Minsk et elle accrédite les
sidelines
craintes
the relevance and the
récurrentes d'une
importance
action
of
militaire
the Minsk
imminente
agreements,
contre l'Ukraine.
and it
Mon pays
heightens
demeure fermement
an
attaché
imminent
au respect
military
de la
attack on
souveraineté,
Ukraine.
de
My country
l'intégrité territoriale de
remains
chaque État.
attached to the
Le strict
territorial
respect de
integrity
ces
and
principes
sovereignty of
cardinaux
every
consacrés
state.
par la Charte des Nations Unies
The
et l'acte
strict
constitutif de l'Union
respect
africaine
of
constitue le
these
ciment de notre
principles
contrat
for the
social
African
en
Union
tant que
is
membre
the
de la
basis
communauté
of our
internationale.
social contract as
Nous demeurons
members of the
convaincus
international community.
que l'intense
We are
activité diplomatique
persuaded
et les différentes
that
démarches
intense
politiques de ces
diplomatic
dernières semaines
activity
finiront par faire
of
prévaloir la
recent
logique
weeks
du
will
dialogue
lead to the
face à
prevalence
celle
of a
de la
logic of
confrontation
dialogue
et
over that
contribueront
of
à éviter
confrontation,
l'irréparable.
and will
Monsieur le
contribute
Président,
to avoiding the
il y a 8 ans, dans un
irreparable.
contexte analogue
8 years
à celui
ago,
qui nous
Mr.
réunit
President,
aujourd'hui,
in a context similar to that which
52
brings us
États
together
membres des Nations
today,
Unies se sont
2
abstenus
member states
lors de
of
l'adoption de la résolution 68/262 de l'Assemblée
the
générale,
General
alors
Assembly
que les
abstained,
mêmes principes
while
fondamentaux de la
the
Charte des
same
Nations Unies
fundamental principles of the
qui
Charter
nous
of the
réunissent
United
aujourd'hui,
Nations that
dont
bring
nous
us
déplorons,
together today
étaient violés.
were violated.
Ce refus de s'aligner, au-delà des
This
pressions subies
refusal
par les
to
délégations à New York comme dans les
align
capitales à cette époque,
themselves
pas si lointaine, traduit une
not
certaine
very long
incompréhension
ago
et peut-être une lassitude
translates
d'une frange significative
a lack of
de la communauté
understanding,
internationale
perhaps,
vis-à-vis de la persistance des zones
of
d'influence
the
que l'on croyait
international
surannées
community, of
après
the
la décolonisation
persistence
et la chute du mur
of
de Berlin.
zones of influence which we thought had been
Malheureusement, cette terrible
overcome
réalité
after the end of
se révèle
colonization.
résiliente dans plusieurs parties du monde,
Unfortunately,
notamment en
this
Afrique,
terrible
en Asie, en
reality
Amérique et aujourd'hui en Europe.
remains in several regions
Monsieur le
of the world,
Président,
in Asia and Africa,
ce Conseil a
and
besoin
today
de
in
garantir
Europe,
le
once
respect
again.
des principes
This
fondamentaux de la
Council
Charte
must guarantee
des Nations
the
Unies, en particulier le
fundamental
règlement pacifique des
principles
différends
of
le
the
respect de
Charter.
l'intégrité territoriale des
It
États
must
et la
ensure
souveraineté
the
nationale.
respect of
Mon pays
national
appelle à un
sovereignty and
cessez-le-feu
territorial
immédiat
integrity. We call for an
et à la
immediate
désescalade,
ceasefire
ainsi qu'au
and
sens de la responsabilité,
de-escalation,
en
as well as a
privilégiant
sense of
les issues
responsibility
pacifiques de règlement des différends,
by giving
conformément à la Charte des Nations
priority
Unies,
to the
et demande
peaceful
aux
settlement
parties
of conflicts
à
in
protéger les
accordance with the
civils et les
Charter.
infrastructures
And we
civiles
call for
et à
protection of
s'abstenir de toute
civilians
action
and
pouvant
civilian
entraver le
infrastructure
déploiement de
and
l'aide
refraining
humanitaire
from
pour
any
les populations
action
qui en ont
that
besoin.
could create an obstacle for
Pour
the provision
terminer,
of humanitarian
je
assistance
voudrais
to the
réaffirmer
populations who
la
so sorely
conviction
need
de
it.
mon pays
I wish to conclude
pour
by
un ordre
reiterating
international fondé sur
my
les règles et
country's
non sur la loi du plus fort.
attachment
Et nous exhortons
to
l'ensemble des
a
parties à ne
rules-based
pas rompre le fil du
international
dialogue et à saisir
order,
toutes les
one which
opportunités
is based on the
susceptibles
rule
de
of
ramener
law,
la paix
not
en Ukraine.
on
Je vous remercie,
the
Monsieur le Président.
law that the strongest will prevail. Thank you very much, sir.
Я благодарю
I thank the
представителя
representative
Габона
of
за его
Gabon for
выступление.
his
Сейчас
statement, and I
предоставляю
now
слово
give the
представителю
floor
Мексики.
to the representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much,
Mi
Mr.
país agradece
President.
la presencia y el
My
llamado
country
del
is grateful
secretario
for the
general en esta
presence
sala,
and the call of
mismo
the
que
Secretary
respaldamos.
General
Agradecemos también la
in this
actualización que
chamber,
presentó la subsecretaria Di Carlo.
and we thank him for being
México
here.
lamenta
We
que a
also
pesar
thank
del
Ms.
llamado
Carlo for her
generalizado de
briefing.
la comunidad internacional,
Mexico
las
deplores the fact that
tensiones
despite
alrededor de Ucrania, en lugar de haber
widespread calls from the
disminuido, han
international
aumentado.
community,
Es por ello que
tensions
esta
around
noche nos
Ukraine,
vemos
instead of
obligados a
having
reunirnos
decreased, have
nuevamente aquí.
increased. For this
Todos los
reason, we
estados,
see
al haber
ourselves
ratificado la Carta de
obliged
las
to meet
Naciones
once
Unidas,
again in
nos
this chamber.
comprometimos a respetar
We
la
all, as
soberanía,
member
la
states,
independencia
having
política
ratified the
y la
Charter of the
integridad
United
territorial de los
Nations,
estados.
committed ourselves
Los
to
miembros del
respecting the
Consejo de
sovereignty,
Seguridad
political
tenemos
independence,
la
and territorial
responsabilidad
integrity of
primordial
states.
en el mantenimiento
We,
de la
members
paz
of the
y la
Security
seguridad
Council, have the
internacionales.
first
Ello
responsibility
genera
for the
la
maintenance of
obligación de
peace and
garantizar
international
que el Consejo de
security.
Seguridad
This
pueda
creates the
desempeñar su
obligation
mandato
to
y
guarantee
de velar por el
that the
respeto de la
Security
Carta
Council
de las
can
Naciones
perform its
Unidas.
mandate and ensure the
México
respect for
respalda
the
todas las
Charter of the
declaraciones
United
del
Nations.
secretario general
Mexico
e
supports
insta a las partes a hacer
all of
uso
the
de los buenos
Secretary
oficios
General's
que el secretario
statements
general
and
ha
calls on
ofrecido.
parties to avail themselves
El
of the good
presidente de
offices
México
which the
declaró esta
Secretary
misma
General has
mañana
offered.
que no aceptamos
The
que un
President
país
of Mexico
invada a otro,
declared just this
ya que es
morning that
contrario
we will
al
not
derecho
accept
internacional.
the invasion of one country by
Recordamos una
another,
vez más
since it is
que
against
Rusia realizó
international
hace
law.
unos días
We
aquí
recall once
mismo
again
ante la comunidad
that
internacional
Russia, a few days
una
ago,
declaración
in this very
contundente
chamber,
de que no
before the
invadiría
international
Ucrania.
community,
El
made an
reciente anuncio
emphatic
de una misión
declaration that it would
especial
not
es
invade
contraria a
Ukraine.
esta declaración.
The sending of a
De
special
darse una
mission runs
una
counter to
invasión,
this
ello
statement.
constituiría un acto
If
de
there were an
agresión de
invasion,
conformidad
this
con la
would be an
resolución
act of
3314
aggression in
de la
accordance with
Asamblea General.
Resolution
No
3314
claudicaremos en
of the
nuestro
General
llamado a
Assembly.
la distensión, a la
We will not
diplomacia
waver
y al
in our
diálogo.
call for
Una
détente,
solución diplomática es la única vía
diplomacy,
que evitará
and
caer
dialogue.
en el
A
precipicio
diplomatic
que
solution is the
implicaría
only
una
way
guerra
of
en
drawing
Europa.
away from the
Muchas gracias,
precipice,
señor
which
presidente.
would be a war in Europe. Thank you very much, sir.
Я благодарю
I thank the
представителя
representative of
Мексики за
Mexico
ее заявление.
for her
Сейчас я
statement, and I shall
сделаю
now make a
заявление
statement
в своем
in my
качестве
capacity as the
представителя
representative of
Российской
the
Федерации.
Russian Federation.
Уважаемые коллеги, сегодня
Colleagues,
у нас
today
выдался
we've had an
интенсивный день
intensive day
с точки
from the
зрения
point of view
обсуждения
of
украинского
discussions of the
кризиса.
Ukrainian
Я
crisis.
не буду
I
повторять
won't
сказанное
repeat what I
мною утром
said
в Генеральной
this morning
Ассамблее.
at the General Assembly.
Могу лишь с
I can
сожалением
only
констатировать по
state with
итогам дня,
regret
что
that
наши
taking
сигналы
stock of the
Киева о
day, our signals to
необходимости
Kiev about the
прекращения
need to stop
провокаций против
provocations
Луганской и
against
Донецкой
Lugansk
народных
and
республик
Donetsk People's
не были
Republics
услышаны.
were not heeded.
Похоже, что у
It would
наших
appear
украинских
that our
коллег, которые
Ukrainian
в
colleagues
последнее
who
время
recently
активно
have been
вооружают и
actively
подзуживают
armed
ряд
and
государств,
egged on by a host of
не
states
исчезало
are still
заблуждение о том, что
harboring
с
the
благословением
illusion
западных
that with the
кураторов
benediction of their
могут
Western
добиться
sponsors,
военного
they will be
решения
able to
проблемы
achieve a
Донбасса.
military solution to the problem in the Donbas.
Иначе сложно
Otherwise, it
объяснить
is difficult to
существенную
explain the substantial
интенсификацию обстрелов и
intensification of
диверсионных
shelling
актов
and acts of
на
diversion
территории
on the
республик.
territory of these republics.
СММ ОБСЕ
The Special
зафиксировал за
Monitoring Mission of the
истекшие
OSCE
сутки
recorded
почти
today almost
2000
2,000
случаев
cases
нарушения
of violations
режима
of the
прекращения
ceasefire
огня,
regime,
в том числе почти
including
1500
almost
человек.
1,500 explosions.
Дончане и
Those living
луганчане
in Donetsk and
по-прежнему
Lugansk
вынуждены
still
укрываться в подвалах.
sheltering in basements.
Продолжается наплыв беженцев в Россию.
Refugees are still
Одним
flowing into
словом,
Russia. In a word, the
провокации
nature of the
вооруженных сил Украины
provocation
не
by the
изменился.
Ukrainian military has not
Вы этого
changed.
замечать не хотите,
You don't want to
повторяя
notice
украинские
this,
басни о том,
repeating the
что
Ukrainian
дончане
fairy
чуть ли не
tales
сами
that
себя
those living in
обстреливают.
Donetsk are all but shelling
Удивляет,
themselves. It
что
is no
возрастающие
surprise that the
страдания
increasing
жителей
suffering of
Донбасса
those living in
никак
the
не
Donbas
трогают
does not
наших
seem to
западных коллег.
affect our Western colleagues.
В ходе целого дня
During through the whole day of debate today at the General Assembly, you haven't been able to find one word of compassion or condolences. It is as if these 4 million people for you simply don't exist.
Я хотел бы напомнить о
Would
том,
like to
что
recall
принцип
that the
суверенитета
principle
и
of
территориальной
sovereignty and
целостности
territorial
государств,
equality of states,
в нарушении
territorial integrity of
которого
states, in
применительно к
violation
Украине
of
нас
which
сегодня обвиняют,
we are being accused of violating in Ukraine
согласно
today,
декларациям
according to the
принципов
Declaration on the Principles
международного
of
права,
International Law
касающихся
pertaining to
дружественных
friendly
связей
relations
между народами,
between peoples,
принятый в
adopted in
1970 году,
1970,
должен неукоснительно соблюдаться
they should
в
be fully
отношении
complied with
государств,
as regards
я
states who,
цитирую,
and I quote, conduct
соблюдающих в своих
themselves in
практических
compliance with
действиях
the
принцип
principle of
равноправия и
equal rights and
самоопределения народов
self-determination of
и
peoples,
вследствие этого
and thus
имеющих
possessed of a
правительство,
government
представляющее
representing
без различия расы, вероисповедания и
without
цвета
distinction
кожи
of race, creed,
весь
or
народ,
color, the
проживающий на
whole
данной
people
территории.
living in that
Конец
territory.
цитаты.
End of quote.
Сегодняшнее правительство
Today's
Украины таковым,
government in
конечно, не
Ukraine
является.
simply is not
Ведь
that.
трагедия
And
Украины
the tragedy in
началась как раз
Ukraine
после
started indeed
нелегитимного
after the
майданного
illegal
переворота в
coup in Maidan
2014
in
году,
2014,
когда вместо
when, rather
диалога с
than dialogue with the
русскоязычными жителями
Russian-speaking
Украины, новая
citizens of
власть
Ukraine, the new
обрушила на них
authorities
пушки и
brandished
самолеты.
guns and airplanes at them.
Информации и свидетельств на
Information
этот
and
счет
testimony to this
предостаточно,
end
однако
is more
наши
than sufficient.
западные
However,
партнеры
our Western
предпочитали их
colleagues
не замечать.
prefer not to notice this.
Мы постарались
We tried
вчера и сегодня,
yesterday
и
and
позавчера
today,
и сегодня
yesterday,
объяснить вам
yesterday,
логику
to
принятых
explain to
руководством
you the
России
logic
решений
of the
о
decision made by
признании
Russia
ЛНР и
to
ДНР.
recognize the LPR and
Акцентировали
DPR. And we focused on
необходимость
the need to ensure
обеспечения
peace
там
and
мира и
security
безопасности.
there.
Однако вы
However,
нас услышать не
You
хотели
don't
и не
didn't want
хотите.
to hear this, and you don't want to hear it now.
Для вас, жители
For you,
Донбасса,
those living in the
исключительно
Donbas,
разменные
are simply
монеты в
pawns
геополитической
in a
игре,
geopolitical
направленные на
game focused on
ослабление России
weakening Russia
и продвижение
and
блока НАТО
promoting
к ее границам.
the bloc from NATO
Для
to
нас
its
же это
borders. For
женщины,
us,
дети и
these people are
старики,
women,
8
children,
лет
the
прячущиеся
elderly,
от
who for
украинских
8 years have
обстрелов и
been
провокаций.
cowering from Ukraine's shelling
Для
and
нас это и
provocations.
украинский
For us,
народ,
these are
страдающий под
Ukraine
гнетом
people
майданной власти.
and not the Maidan authorities.
В этом
In
разница
this is
наших
the
подходов.
difference in our
Не
approaches.
сменив
If you do not
геополитическую
change
оптику,
the
вы нас никогда
geopolitical
не
lens,
поймете.
you will never
Но
understand
зато
us.
нам бесконечно благодарны те,
Then,
ради кого
those
принимались
on whose
упомянутые
behalf
мной
this
решения,
decision I
те, о
mentioned
ком
was
вы не
made,
вспоминали все эти 8 лет,
who
называя
not
их
even thought
исключительно
about over these
пророссийскими
8 years, simply
сепаратистами
calling them
и террористами.
pro-Russian separatists and
И
terrorists.
для нас это самое главное.
Those people are the most
Хотел
important
бы
for
вновь повторить,
us.
что
I'd like to say
корень
once again, the
сегодняшнего
root of
кризиса
today's
вокруг
crisis
Украины
around
– действия
Ukraine is
самой
the actions
Украины,
of Ukraine itself,
занимавшейся
who for
многолетним
many years are
саботажем своих
sabotaging
прямых
its
обязательств по
obligations
Минскому
under the
комплексу мер.
Minsk package of measures.
Еще на прошлой неделе
Last week
существовала
even there was a
надежда на
hope
то, что в
that
Киеве
Kiev would
одумаются
rethink
и все-таки
and
выполнят
nevertheless
то, под чем
implement what it
подписались в
signed up to
2015
do in
году.
2015.
Для этого
For
прежде
this,
всего был
first and
нужен
foremost, we
прямой
needed
диалог с
direct
Донецком и
dialogue with
Луганском.
Donetsk and Lugansk.
Однако
However,
очередное
further
подтверждение неготовности
confirmation
Украины
that
к
Ukraine
такому
is not
диалогу,
ready for this type of
шагам по
dialogue, and
предоставлению
steps to
Донбассу
grant
особого
Donbas the
статуса,
special status as
предусмотренного
set
Минскими
forth in the Minsk
соглашениями,
agreements,
причем с
while
поддержкой этой
with the
позиции
support of this
западными
position
покровителями,
from Western backers,
окончательно убедила нас
finally
в том, что мы
convinced us
просто
that
не имеем
we
права
simply
заставлять
cannot
жителей
force
Донбасса
those living
страдать и
in
дальше.
the Donbas to suffer more.
Поскольку, как я уже
As
сказал,
much as I already
украинские
said, the
провокации
Ukrainian
против
provocation
Донбасса
against
не только
those
не
in Donbas not only
прекратились,
has
но
not
и
stopped but has
интенсифицировались.
intensified.
Руководство
The
ЛНР
leaders
и
of the
ДНР
LPR and
обратилось
the
к нам с
DPR
просьбой оказать
turned
военную
to us with a
поддержку
request to
в
provide military
соответствии с
support in
двусторонними
line with bilateral
договорами о сотрудничестве,
cooperation
заключенными
agreements
одновременно с их признанием.
agreed at the same time as they were
Это логичный
recognition.
шаг,
This is a logical
являющийся
step,
следствием
which is a consequence
действий
of the
украинского
actions
режима.
of the Ukrainian regime.
В ходе этого
During this
заседания
meeting,
президент
the President
России
of Russia,
Путин обратился
spoke
с обращением,
with,
в котором он сообщил,
and
что
said
принял
that
решение
he
о
made a
специальной
decision
военной
for a
операции
special
на
military
Донбассе.
operation in the Donbas.
Мы не знаем всех
We don't
деталей
know all the details
сегодня, но
today,
кратко
but
хочу вам
briefly
сообщить,
I would like to inform you
что
that
из его тезиса
from
следует,
his
что оккупация
statement, it says that the
Украины в наши
occupation of
планы не
Ukraine
входит.
is not in our
Цель
plans. The aim
этой спецоперации
of this
защиты
special
людей,
operation is to
которые на
protect the
протяжении
people
8
who
лет
for over 8
подвергаются
years have been
издевательствам, геноциду
suffering
со стороны киевского режима
genocide from the
и
Kiev Aliyev
И для этого
regime.
мы будем
And for this,
стремиться к
we will
демилитаризации и
aim to demilitarize
денацификации
and
Украины,
de-genocide
а также
Ukraine,
преданию
and
суду
also
тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления
hold
против
accountable those
мирных
who
жителей,
carried
в
out
том
so many crimes against
числе
civilians,
граждан Российской
including
Федерации.
citizens of the Russian
Это
Federation.
решение
This
было
decision
принято в
was
соответствии
made
с
in
статьей
line with
51
Article
Устава
51
ООН,
of the UN
санкций Совета Федерации Российской Федерации и во исполнении соглашения о дружбе и взаимопонимании с ДНР и ЛНР. Сейчас поступает много информации на эту тему, ее пока еще предстоит проанализировать. Будем держать вас в курсе событий. Сейчас я возобновляю свои функции председателя Совета Безопасности и предоставляю слово представителю Украины.
Well, distinguished members of the Security Council, Secretary General, Under-Secretary, before I try to deliver parts of the statement that I came here with tonight, most of it is already useless since 10 p.m. New York time. I would like to cite Article 4 of the UN Charter, and it says, membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present Charter and in the judgment of the organization are able and willing to carry out these obligations. Russia is not able to carry out any of the obligations. The ambassador of the Russian Federation 3 minutes ago confirmed that his president declared a war on my country. So before I read parts of my statement, I would like to avail of the presence of the Secretary General and request the Secretary General to distribute among the members of the Security Council and the members of the General Assembly the legal memos by the Legal Council of the United Nations dated December 1991, and in particular the legal memo dated 19th of December 1991. The one that we've been trying to get out of the Secretariat for a very long time, and we were denied to get it. The Article 4, Paragraph 2 of the Charter reads, the admission of any such state to membership in the United Nations will be affected by a decision of the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. Mr. Secretary General, please instruct the Secretariat to distribute among the members of the Security Council and the members of the General Assembly a decision by the Security Council dated December 1991 that recommends that the Russian Federation can be a member of this organization, as well as a decision by the General Assembly dated December 1991, where General Assembly welcomes the Russian Federation to this organization. It would be a miracle if the Secretariat is able to produce such decisions. There is nothing in the Charter of the United Nations about continuity as a sneaky way to get into the organization. So when I was coming here an hour ago or so, I was intending to ask the Russian ambassador to confirm on the record that the Russian troops will not start firing at Ukrainians today and go ahead with the offensive. It became useless 48 minutes ago. Because about 48 minutes ago, your president declared the war on Ukraine. So now I would like to ask the ambassador of the Russian Federation to say on the record that at this very moment, your troops do not shell and bomb Ukrainian cities, that your troops do not move in the territory of Ukraine. You have a smartphone, you can call Lavrov right now. We can make a pause to let you go out and call him. If you are not in a position to give an affirmative answer, the Russian Federation ought to relinquish responsibilities of the President of the Security Council, pass these responsibilities on to a legitimate member of the Security Council, a member that is respectful of the Charter. And I ask the members of the Security Council to convene an emergency meeting immediately and consider all necessary draft decisions to stop the war. Because it's too late, my dear colleagues, to speak about de-escalation. Too late. The Russian president declared the war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? Ambassador, shall I do that right now, or you can't confirm it? Do not interrupt me, please. Thank you.
Then don't ask me questions when you are speaking. Proceed with your statement.
Anyway, you declared the war. It is the responsibility of this body to stop the war. So I call on every one of you to do everything possible to stop the war. Or should I play the video with your president declaring the war? Thank you very much.
Опять я вынужден сказать фразу, что я благодарю представителя Украины за его выступление. На вопросы я отвечать не планирую. Все, что я знаю сегодня, я уже сказал. Будить министра Лаврова в это время не собираюсь. Вы сказали вам, что информация о том, как развиваются события, вам предоставим. И не называйте это войной, это называется специальная военная операция на Донбассе. А сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Германии.
Mr. President, we meet at the very moment of a military escalation we have not experienced in Europe for over a generation's time. The President of the Russian Federation announced a military operation on Ukrainian territory. We condemn this in the strongest possible terms. And we call upon all members of the Security Council and the United Nations to now stand up for Ukraine and against a shameless breach of international law. 2 days ago, Russia's decision to recognize the self-proclaimed so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk was harshly rejected in this council. It had already dealt a devastating blow to the principles and the international order that the United Nations stand for. Russia has not listened, and it turns out it was not prepared to listen. It has continued its massive military buildup, and we observed and observe cyber attacks directed against Ukraine, and now Russian military is moving into Ukrainian territory. By the actions and this unprovoked military operation, Russia is violating the core principles of the UN Charter. We condemn the use of force against innocent people and the violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms. We urge Russia to terminate its military action against Ukraine immediately and withdraw its troops. Mr. President, our thoughts are with the Ukrainian people. We will be steadfast in our support for Ukraine and our support for the UN Charter. The Russian aggression will come at an unprecedented price politically, economically, and morally. Mr. President, France, Ukraine, and my country stood ready for diplomacy, for another meeting in the Normandy format, or for the summit that Ukraine had proposed. With our allies and partners, we called on Russia to seek a diplomatic way forward in vain. Now is the moment to speak up and defend the international order of the UN Charter against unilateral aggression, jointly and decisively.
Tonight, we stand with Ukraine, and we are doing so unwavering and determined. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Germany for her statement. And now I give the floor to the United States, who wish to make a further statement.
Thank you. In my remarks tonight, I said that we predicted Russia's false flag attacks, the misinformation, the theatrical emergency meetings, and the cyber attacks. But one piece had not come to pass. Unfortunately, while we've been meeting in the Security Council tonight, it appears that President Putin has ordered that last step. At the exact time as we are gathered in the Council seeking peace, Putin delivered a message of war in total disdain for the responsibility of this Council. This is a grave emergency. The Council will need to act, and we will put a resolution on the table tomorrow. As President Biden said tonight, Russia alone is responsible for the death and destruction this attack will bring, and the United States and our allies and partners will respond in a united and decisive way. The world will hold Russia accountable. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom, who asked to make a further statement.
Thank you. As we sat in this chamber urging Russia to step back, President Putin announced special military operations on Ukrainian territory. This is unprovoked and unjustified. This is a grave day for Ukraine and for the principles of the United Nations. We and our partners have been clear that there will be consequences for Russia's actions. We fully support the United States' call for a UN Security Council resolution. This Council must do all it can to stop the war and uphold the Charter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and now I'll give the floor to the representative of Albania, who also wished to make a further statement.
Dear colleagues, we could not end this meeting that what we had feared and anticipated since days is happening. Explosions are reported in Kiev and in several other cities in Ukraine. Masks are finally down and tanks are in. As we speak, Russia is implementing its plan and attacking a neighbor to whom it has decided to deny existence, freedom, the land, dignity, and life. We call on all the members of the United Nations to rally in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, to stand with Ukraine and its people, to condemn firmly and unequivocally this aggression, to stand for peace, for rules, for international law, and take whatever measures they deem necessary to show the aggressor that its actions will bear consequences. Let me reiterate, Russia will be held responsible for the consequences of an unprovoked war, for the loss of human lives, for causing unbearable human pain, and for opting for destruction when we need development, for bringing death where we aspire for need, for hope, for choosing to become an outlaw when we need cooperation. Russia will bear historical blame and shame and the consequences of invading a neighboring country and attempting to destroy European security. Let's unite and make sure it will not succeed. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania, and I now give the floor to the representative of France for a further statement.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
au moment où nous nous réunissions en urgence pour essayer de prévenir le pire et le déclenchement d'une guerre, nous avons appris, comme vous tous, que le président de la Fédération de Russie avait ordonné une opération militaire spéciale dans le Donbas et que la Russie s'efforcera de démilitariser l'Ukraine. La Russie a donc fait le choix de la guerre. La France condamne dans les termes les plus forts le déclenchement de ces opérations. Cette décision annoncée au moment même où ce Conseil se réunit illustre le mépris dans lequel la Russie tient le droit international et les Nations Unies. La Russie doit en être comptable devant le Conseil de sécurité. C'est pourquoi la France se joindra à ses partenaires au sein de ce Conseil pour préparer dans les prochaines heures une résolution condamnant la guerre conduite par la Russie. Nous appelons l'ensemble des membres de ce Conseil à nous soutenir dans ces circonstances tragiques. Nous appelons la Fédération de Russie à respecter le droit international humanitaire en toutes circonstances. Nous appelons à la protection et au respect de tous les civils, notamment les personnes vulnérables, les femmes, les enfants et le personnel humanitaire. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France, and I give the floor now to the representative of Ireland to make a further statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I spoke earlier, I said that the path for diplomacy and the path for dialogue was perilously narrow, and I didn't realise, in fact, how narrow and indeed how close to the precipice we really were just over an hour ago. We now see that that path has been closed by the announcement of military aggression on the part of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. That is something that we roundly condemn. We stand with the people of Ukraine tonight, with every man, woman and child who is seeing this news as we did, as we sat here in the chamber, and whose lives are at risk. We believe it is now time indeed for this Council to stand up and assume its responsibility and to speak out in the strongest possible terms about this act of aggression. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ireland, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine to make a further statement.
Well, as I said, relinquish your duties as a chair. Call Putin, call Lavrov to stop aggression. And I welcome the decision of some members of this Council to meet as soon as possible to consider the necessary decision that would condemn the aggression that you launch on my people. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
Я бы хотел сказать в
I
заключение,
wanted to say in
что
conclusion that
мы не
we
производим агрессию против
aren't
украинского народа,
being
а
aggressive
против
against
той
the
хунты,
Ukrainian
которая
people,
захватила
but
власть в Киеве.
against the junta that is
Список
in
ораторов
power in
исчерпан,
Kiev. There are no
заседание
more
закрывается.
speakers on the list. This meeting is adjourned.
Go ahead, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the third time in a row that Russian presidency has not allowed us to speak under the Rule 37. And so, as PR of Estonia, I am delivering this statement here on behalf of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We welcome and underline the urgency of today's emergency meeting on the UN Security Council, the fourth over the last 4 weeks, to discuss the latest developments concerning Russia's further aggression against Ukraine. We thank the Secretary General and Under-Secretary General Di Carlo for their briefings. The Council was convening as we witness yet another escalatory step as a result of a deliberate policy of aggression by the Russian leadership, and that has led us to this conflict. We unequivocally condemn the announcement by President Putin and the military operation in Ukraine. It is unprovoked and unlawful act of aggression. Ukraine is facing a repeated violation of its territorial integrity after the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sebastopol in 2014. Acts of aggression and the use of force are violations of international law, including the UN Charter that require accountability. We call on all UN member states and UN bodies to prevent the pending war and put a stop to the violations against the state and people of Ukraine. The request for military assistance by Moscow from the so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk announces a very dangerous additional step against Ukraine's sovereignty. It would risk thousands of lives. It follows the decision by President Putin to recognize the non-government-controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts of Ukraine as independent entities, and the ensuing decision to send Russian troops into these areas, preceded by the unprecedented buildup of troops on Ukraine's border. We have strongly condemned these decisions as blatant breaches of international law, including the UN Charter, as well as of the Minsk agreements. We heard numerous similar messages of condemnation and concern from among countries around the world, across all regional groups at the General Assembly today. We have heard from the UN Secretary General, who stated that the decision of the Russian Federation to recognize the so-called independence of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions is a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. It undermines the United Nations itself. The UN should not share the fate of the League of Nations. The Secretary General also made clear his concern about the perversion of the concept of peacekeeping. Troops entering the territory of another country without its consent are not impartial peacekeepers, nor are they peacekeepers at all, as he pointed out. They are called invaders. Yet we note today that these persistent calls for the respect of international law, diplomacy and dialogue continue to be unheeded. We underline that the Russian Federation's use of force against Ukraine is completely unjustified and unacceptable. It must be met with unity, firmness, and determination in solidarity with Ukraine. The European Union has responded to the latest violations, including with additional restrictive measures. We stand ready to adopt more wide-ranging political and economic sanctions. Russia's actions against Ukraine are not a matter just for Ukraine or for Europe. They have severe implications globally for every UN member state and the rules-based international order. We urge the Russian Federation, as a party to the conflict, to reverse the recognition of the so-called People's Republics, uphold its commitments, abide by international law, and return to the discussions within the Normandy format and the trilateral contact group. It has a clear responsibility under international law to work to find a peaceful settlement of the conflict. We strongly urge Russia to respect the principles of the UN Charter, to refrain from any further escalatory actions, and to engage in meaningful diplomacy. We reiterate the unwavering support of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. We, with the international community, stand in solidarity with Ukraine. Thank you.
Good evening. The Secretary General will make some remarks, and then we'll take a few questions. Thank you. Sir.
This is the saddest moment in my tenure as Secretary General of the United Nations. I started this meeting of the Security Council addressing President Putin and telling him from the bottom of my heart, stop your troops from an offensive to Ukraine, give peace a chance, because too many people have already died. During the meeting, President Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbas and required the Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms. So in the present circumstances, I must change my appeal. And I must say, President Putin, in the name of humanity, bring your troops back to Russia. In the name of humanity, do not allow to start in Europe what could be the worst war since the beginning of the century, with consequences not only devastating for Ukraine, not only tragic for the Russian Federation, but with an impact we cannot even foresee in relation to their consequences for the global economy in a moment when we are emerging from the COVID, and so many developing countries absolutely need to have space for the recovery, which would be very, very difficult with high prices of oil, with the end of exports of wheat from the Ukraine, and with rising interest rates caused by the instability in international markets. This conflict must stop now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. You've just talked about consequences. I wonder if you could spell out some more what you think the consequences will be for Russia and for Ukraine and its people.
Well, it's clear that military action will be happening in the territory of Ukraine. And obviously, if they lead to a generalized war, it is difficult to forecast how dramatic it will be in the number of people who will die, in the number of people who will be displaced, in the number of people who will lose hope in relation to the future. It is also clear that the consequences for the Russian Federation will be very meaningful. It's not for me to comment on sanctions that are being implemented, but it's clear that there will be also consequences. But what is clear for me is that this war doesn't make any sense. It violates the principles of the Charter, and it causes, or will cause, if it doesn't stop, a level of suffering Europe has not known since at least the volcanic crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Pam Falk from CBS News. Is there anything the UN can do to get Russia back to the bargaining table at this point?
We can, of course, in my case, appeal. The Security Council is the body that has the powers given by the Charter to address this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as you read and you heard in the Security Council chamber, the Russian war started against Ukraine. In fact, the war started in 2014. It's a historical embarrassment to the humanity and to this particular organization that has failed to take the necessary actions in the course of the last 8 years. I demanded in the Security Council that Ambassador Nebenzia of Russia relinquish his responsibilities as the chair, as the president of the Security Council, as a representative of a country that egregiously violated the Charter, that he pass his duties to someone in the Security Council who is capable to perform the duties of the President of the Council. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's meeting of the Security Council, where an appropriate draft resolution will be put to vote, and I call to everyone to vote in favor. The design of the United Nations is very faulty. You can ask an aggressor to abstain from vote at the stage of peaceful resolution under Chapter 6, but you cannot ask aggressor, believe it or not, to abstain from vote under Chapter 7 when the Council deals with the aggression. I have also asked the Secretary General of the United Nations to produce the copies of the decisions of the Security Council and the General Assembly dated 1991 that, in accordance with Article 4 of the Charter, welcome the desire of the Russian Federation to be a member of this organization. Thank you.
You were visibly emotional during this speech. You mentioned the fact that most of your speech was obsolete by the time you had the chance to read it. What is the message to the world at this moment? As we heard from Russia, the fact that a special operation in Donbas was launched, but we hear that is bombing and explosions in Kyiv, that special forces from the Black Sea started to enter Ukrainian territory. And personally, what's your feeling? You have family, you have people in Ukraine right now.
Well, it's a war. If we here in New York do not remember what war is, then go to the library and pull out the footage of the war. It means thousands and thousands of people killed, if not millions. And what I want from the world, I want the world to rally, after all, and defend the world from the aggression, from the Russian Federation. All right, it's late. We have to digest the information, we have to verify information, and we have to be here in the Security Council tomorrow morning.
Ambassador, just last question. At the end of the speech, the ambassador of Russia says that this wasn't an aggression against the Ukrainian people, but an aggression against those that were in power. Do you believe that this is a flat-out...
You can't be serious. Are you serious? You want me to dissect the crazy, lunatic semantics of a person whose president violates the charter, whose president declared a war, and he's playing with words? And you ask me to interpret it? It's lunacy. It's lunacy. Absolutely.